A strong earthquake hit off the Greek and Turkish coasts overnight, killing 2 people. More than 120 were hurt when the magnitude 6.6 quake struck. The epicenter was in the Aegean Sea between 2 popular tourist destinations, Bodrum, Turkey, and the Greek island of Kos. Jonathan Vigliotti is in London with how people tried to take cover. Jonathan, good morning.
Good morning. The quake hit on one of the busiest weeks of the tourist season, leaving thousands of people without safe shelter and no clear place to go.
This woman just blew out the candles on her birthday cake when the earthquake struck, blowing up what appeared to be a transformer in the distance. Within seconds, the Aegean Sea spilled into the coastal town of Bodrum, Turkey. Surveillance video from inside a nearby cafe showed panicked diners running for safety. And hospital staff hid with patients under desks. Those inside were later evacuated to the streets. Daybreak showed thousands of tourists who spent the night outdoors, many sleeping in parking lots and on sunbeds along the beach. The earthquake rattled the region at 1:30 in the morning. A souvenir shop didn't stand a chance. The most extensive damage was to older buildings, like those on the Greek island of Kos. The 2 tourists killed in the quake from Turkey and Sweden were inside this bar. The powerful tremor also caused a small tsunami, which tossed boats along the Turkish coast like toys. Heavy flooding and debris blocked roads, stalling rescue efforts.
It's the second strong earthquake to strike the area in recent weeks. Today's quake produced more than 100 aftershocks, which are now threatening the stability of buildings already damaged.
A Palestinian man was killed on Friday as clashes continued for a 6th day near the holy shrine in East Jerusalem that's known as Temple Mount to Jews and a noble sanctuary to Muslims. Israeli forces fired tear gas and stun grenades, and Palestinian protesters threw stones. Some Palestinian factions had called for a day of rage after the delicate status quo at the shrine was upset by Israel's installation of metal detectors there. Muslim men prayed outside the shrine in protest at Israel's beefing up of security there.
Today specifically, only men from the age of 50 and upwards will be allowed in and around the area of the Old City and the Temple Mount. And the Temple Mount will be open to women of all ages. The security measures will continue as long as necessary.
The metal detectors were installed after 2 Israeli police officers were shot dead outside the shrine by Palestinian gunmen last week. Israel says their guns had been smuggled into the shrine, and after carrying out a rare search inside it, tensions rose still further. Israel captured East Jerusalem from the Palestinians in 1967.
The leader of the resistance movement, Hamas, has warned Israel's policy of collective punishment against Palestinians will not be tolerated.
My clear message to the Zionist enemy is that Al-Aqsa and Al-Quds are a red line. I say to the Zionist enemy that the policy of closure and implementing punishment measures against the residents of Al-Quds and the holy sites will never pass.
In Istanbul, local Turks attacked the Neve Shalom synagogue to protest Israel's installation of metal detectors at the Temple Mount. Dozens of protesters kicked the synagogue's gates and threw stones, chanting, "If you don't let us into our places of worship, we won't let you into yours." The protest was staged by a far-right nationalist and Islamist movement. Its leader threatened the group would return. And what do we know also about reactions from Jordan? As you said, the Jordanians are a major player in this conflict. First of all, can you explain why Jordan is so crucial and what kind of talks we've been hearing?
Well, one of the vestiges of Jordanian control of East Jerusalem from before 1967 is that Jordan still has a special role on the Temple Mount, and the Waqf, the governing body of the Muslim clerics who are in charge of the day-to-day running of the Temple Mount, are under the control ultimately of the Jordanian government. Jordan's seen as the protector of that compound, so Jordan still has a special stake in what happens there. So the Jordanians, we've seen on our screens over the course of today, large demonstrations in Amman, thousands of people people there out in the streets, very, very concerned, both because of geography and because of that special political role. The Jordanian government here having a real interest in close cooperation with Israel, but also a strong interest for their own public opinion in showing that they're looking out for Muslim rights in that compound.
The UN Food and Agriculture Organization says that rainfall in key producing areas fell below average between April and June this year. It said that the sanctions imposed on the country over its nuclear program are also part of the reason for its food shortage. Pyongyang has been relying heavily on international food aid since a famine rocked the country in the 1990s.
It appears the U.S. is going to start banning citizens from traveling to North Korea. Two tourism companies that specialize in trips to North Korea said U.S. authorities will announce the ban July 27th and that it will take effect 30 days after. The announcement comes shortly after the death of Otto Warmbier. Last year, Warmbier, a U.S. college student, was sentenced to 15 years in prison with hard labor in North Korea. He confessed to taking a propaganda banner from his hotel in Pyongyang, but it's unclear if that confession was coerced. Warmbier was released in June and taken to the University of Cincinnati Medical Center. He was in a coma and had severe brain damage. Young Pioneer Tours, one of the companies that announced the ban, organized Warmbier's trip to North Korea. The other company, Koryo Tours, said the ban has been expected.
The UN Security Council has adopted a resolution that reaffirms sanctions on the ISIL and al-Qaeda terror groups. The resolution reiterated nations should impose a travel ban, an asset freeze, and arms embargo on the militant groups and those related to them. A 2015 resolution added ISIL and those that have been supporting it to a sanction list that previously only targeted al-Qaeda. The new resolution also puts on the list 8 more Syrian organizations and individuals believed to be linked with the two terror groups. China's permanent representative to the United Nations, Liu Jieyi, chaired the meeting and said China welcomed the adoption and urged members to implement the resolution earnestly.
And members of Congress have introduced bipartisan legislation to increase sanctions on Lebanese terror group Hezbollah, accusing it of violence in Syria and amassing rockets on Israel's border. The bill would update existing sanctions to limit Hezbollah's fundraising by putting pressure on banks that do business with it and targeting countries that support it. The bill would also bar entry to the United States for anyone found to be supporting the group.
The Lebanese resistance movement Hezbollah says that it has launched an operation to fully dislodge terrorists along the border with Syria. In a statement, Hezbollah said the offensive is aimed at targeting foreign-backed militants in the region of Arsal. Hezbollah forces also managed to retake control of an area south of Syria's Ghalamun region. Reports suggest that Hezbollah units backed by the Syrian army's airstrikes pounded several positions of the militants in border areas. They also targeted militants who were en route to Arsal. Arsal has been a major hub for the terrorists crossing across the Lebanon-Syria border since 2011. The region fell to terrorists in 2014, but the army later managed to recapture it.
A senior Russian foreign ministry official says the U.S. sanctions against Iran over its ballistic missile program are unfounded. That's according to the state-run RIA news agency. Washington on Tuesday slapped new economic sanctions against Iran, saying its malign activities in the Middle East had undercut any positive contributions coming from the 2015 Iran nuclear accord. However, Russia believes the U.S. fulfilled its own part of the deal very badly. Since U.S. President Donald Trump took office in January, the country has been putting more pressure on Iran, such as extending the sanction period and banning its citizens from entering the United States.
On Thursday, the United States Army's top general in Europe told Reuters that allies in Eastern Europe and Ukraine are worried that Russia's planned war games in September could be a Trojan horse, aimed at leaving behind military equipment brought into Belarus. Russia has sought to reassure NATO that the military exercises will respect international limits on size, but NATO and U.S. officials remain wary about their scale and scope. U.S. Army Lieutenant General Ben Hodges, who leads U.S. Army forces in Europe, told Reuters, "People are worried this is a Trojan horse. They say, we're just doing an exercise, and then all of a sudden they've moved all these people and capabilities somewhere."
One of China's most advanced warships is leading a small flotilla to the Baltic Sea. There it will engage in exercises with the Russian Navy. The Russian and Chinese defense ministries have confirmed the participation of a Chinese-guided missile destroyer in the week-long war games. It's the first ever joint operation by the two powers in European waters, according to a report on the People's Liberation Army's official website. The Russian Ministry of Defense said training will include anti-submarine warfare and air defense drills.
The movement of an American anti-aircraft missile system to Lithuania is the first time the U.S. has deployed such a capability in the Baltic states. The weapons, known as Patriot missiles, arriving as part of a 2-week military exercise. But its placement on Russia's relative doorstep comes amid a massive buildup of NATO forces in the region, mirrored in kind by Moscow. And Lithuania's president, at a ceremony marking the exercise, says her country should have a permanent battery of the anti-aircraft missiles. Earlier this month, the United States approved the possible sale of 7 Patriot systems to Romania, worth $3.9 billion. And Poland says it's signed a memorandum for their own purchase from Washington as well. Russia has accused NATO of saber-rattling and increasing the risk of a new conflict in Europe. U.S. troops didn't fire their Patriot missiles during the exercise, which was also attended by troops from Britain, Poland, and Latvia.
Turkey has reacted angrily to pressure from Germany to release the 6 human rights activists it's continuing to hold in pre-trial detention, one of them a German national. Berlin has warned there will be economic penalties, and it's also issued travel warnings for tourists heading to Turkey's Mediterranean beaches. In response, Turkey's presidential spokesman said Germany was being disrespectful against the Turkish judiciary. This is being disrespectful against a country such as Turkey that will not share its independence and sovereignty with anyone. They will respect the judiciary here. We strongly condemn statements saying German citizens coming to Turkey are not safe. Both countries are NATO allies, which further complicates the downward trend in their relations.
This video, released by the Pakistani army, allegedly shows an Indian military post being targeted. The Pakistani side says the attack was carried out in retaliation for the Indian side's attack on civilians. The exchange of fire along the so-called line of control in Kashmir region is now a routine. Both sides blame each other for the clashes in the highly militarized region, which independent media has no access to. The root cause of the tensions along the de facto border is attributed to the current uprising in the disputed Kashmir region. New Delhi accuses Islamabad of encouraging and supporting the armed movement in the Indian-controlled Kashmir. Pakistan, however, rejects the allegation and accuses India of provoking clashes on the border to divert the world's attention from the issue of Kashmir. Kashmir has been a bone of contention between India and Pakistan. The nuclear-armed neighbors have fought 2 wars over the Himalayan region, which both claim in full but control in part. Several rounds of talks have also failed to settle the decades-old dispute.
Police firing tear gas at protesters as tensions spilled over in the streets of Venezuela. Demonstrations in Caracas coming to a head during a strike called by foes of President Nicolas Maduro. They're fearful that upcoming elections could change the constitution and even consolidate dictatorship in the OPEC country. In the state of Táchira, battle lines were drawn, protesters setting out makeshift barricades to defend against members of the National Guard, acting on the government's orders. Amid inflation, widespread food and medical shortages, protesters seeking to raise the stakes in the popular movement against the Maduro government. Brandishing homemade weapons and making Molotov cocktails, they're calling for freedom. This protester saying they'll stay on the streets until the fall of Maduro, calling him a dictator. Many businesses in Táchira have been faced with looting. Authorities have blamed protesters for the attacks on businesses, but the opposition has accused the government of sending in supporters to taint government critics. According to a local rights group, more than 170 people were arrested by late afternoon during the strike. Violence during 4 months of anti-government unrest has taken around 100 lives, injured thousands, left hundreds in jail, and further damaged an economy in its 4th year of a debilitating decline.
Poland's lower house of parliament has passed a controversial law that gives the government more power over the Supreme Court. It would mean the removal and replacement of all Supreme Court judges. Last week, the ruling Law and Justice Party passed plans for politicians to have the power to appoint judges. The opposition says it will erode the independence of the judiciary and undermine democracy. And although the Conservative Law and Justice Party, or PIS, now needs to take the bill to the upper house, the party has a majority in both houses of parliament. European Council President Donald Tusk, who used to be Poland's Prime Minister, has called the law backward and wants to meet with Poland's president. But ultimately, there's little the EU can do to alter the passage of a law through an EU country. Recently, thousands of people have held candlelit protests against the planned bill, asking the president to veto the legislation and arguing that the government could destroy judicial independence and appoint only judges who support the ruling party.
On Friday, Philippine President Rodrigo Duterte responded to U.S. lawmakers who opposed the idea of the controversial leader visiting the White House, saying that he would never go to the United States. Duterte was hitting back at remarks by Massachusetts Congressman James McGovern, who told a hearing of the Tom Lantos Human Rights Commission that he would protest against such a visit if U.S. President Donald Trump followed through on an invitation to the firebrand Philippine leader. Duterte said, "I've seen America and it's lousy. It would be good for the U.S. Congress to start with their own investigation of their own violations of the so many civilians killed in the prosecution of the wars in the Middle East." In Washington on Thursday, a commission of U.S. House Representatives convened for a hearing on Duterte's deadly year-long war on drugs, responsible for the deaths of thousands of Philippine citizens.
Greek hotel and restaurant employees have called a 24-hour strike over what they say is a deterioration of workers' rights, as record numbers of tourists arrive in the country, boosting the industry. Greece expects to welcome 300 million foreign tourists in 2017, bringing in revenue worth 14 billion euros. Tourism employs around one-fifth of the country's workforce. The growth of tourism, with 30 million tourists, that we're told is supposed to benefit not only the employers but us in the country, is a big lie. We work very hard and they give us nothing. Our average salary is just 420 euros all over the country, and they tell us that with these salaries we will have better days. Anti-austerity strikes are frequent in Greece, but fears the strike would cause disruption to service at hotels and tourist sites were unfounded as turnout was low.
I think workers all over don't benefit necessarily from the high-end tourist dollars. Like, we just checked into a very nice hotel, and I'm sure the staff there is not going to get much of what we're paying.
The employees in the tourist industry went on a 24-hour strike, but the majority of hotel businesses worked normally. The fear of private sector workers that they might lose their jobs mean they avoid participating in such protests.
On Thursday, bus and subway lines in Rome and Naples were affected by local public transport strikes called by base unions. In Naples, a 24-hour industrial action caused major delays and disruptions to commuters. The USB union is calling on the local government to come up with a new plan to revamp the city's battered public transport. In the Italian capital, workers staged the strike between 8:30 a.m. and 12:30 p.m., affecting connections to airport as well as regional and suburban train and bus lines.
Also on Thursday, a demonstration was staged in Rome at the Economic Development Ministry by workers from Italy's giant steel producer, Ilva. The steel company, which employs over 14,000 people, was for long inactive and put under special administration due to serious environmental problems. The company has been recently acquired by AM Invesco, a group that Ilva workers fear will lay off thousands of employees as part of its industrial plan.
Alibaba opened an experimental staffless convenience store last week called Tao Cafe, which was equipped with big data and facial recognition technology. In December last year, Amazon opened its first staffless smart store called Amazon Go in Seattle. And in May, French supermarket operator Auchan opened its staffless Bingo Box store in Shanghai. In just half a year, over a dozen such stores were opened, including Chinese snack maker Wahaha's Take Go, as well as a robot-operated shop launched by a company called F5.
Our overall operational cost is less than 1/8 of that of traditional retail stores. Currently, the total cost, including electricity, water, and internet expenses, is no more than 2,500 yuan each month for each store.
Besides lower costs, the use of big data and mobile technology is a big attraction of the smart stores. The use of the new technologies provide more opportunities for the retail sector and can also meet more consumer demands. With AI, a so-called new retail mode has emerged, with companies like Alibaba, Yonghui Superstores, Walmart, and JD.com all launched their new concept stores that combine physical stores with the use of new technologies. With the combination of online and offline tools, it is believed that the retail sector will get a boost in growth.
People take to the streets in Morocco's northern Rif region, part of the kingdom's biggest wave of demonstrations since Arab Spring-inspired rallies 6 years ago. Tensions have been simmering here since October, when a fishmonger died after being crushed by a refuse truck. Police had confiscated his fish after accusing him of buying it illegally. They dumped it in the truck. He climbed inside to recover his stock and was crushed. Moroccans have also become frustrated with what they say is corruption, underdevelopment and injustice. Many taking part in the unrest travelled from all over the country as well as Europe.
16 from the African nation of Burundi who came to the U.S. to compete in an international robotics competition, now missing. And this morning, there's fears they may no longer be in the country at all after 2 were spotted crossing the border into Canada. The team mentor told police they had 1-year visas, but the embassy of Burundi says it had no idea they were even in the U.S. Police not suspecting foul play.
Global terrorist attacks and fatalities from terrorist attacks were down for the second year in a row in 2016. That's according to the U.S. Department of State's annual country reports on terrorism, which showed a 9% drop in attacks and 13% drop in deaths. So while globally terrorist attacks and deaths are down, the report also notes that the Democratic Republic of the Congo, Iraq, Somalia, South Sudan, and Turkey all saw an increase in attacks and deaths. 55% of all attacks in 2016 were in just 5 countries: Iraq, Afghanistan, India, Pakistan, and the Philippines. And while ISIS and Al-Qaeda remained the most potent terrorist organizations in 2016, both groups have suffered considerable setbacks, losing both territory and important leaders. Numbers for ISIS's propaganda distribution and media outlets were also down in 2016. Unsurprisingly, Iran was once again designated as the foremost state sponsor of terrorism, with the report citing the Iranian Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps and Iranian proxies as destabilizing forces. Sudan remained a designated state sponsor of terrorism, but there were no indications it was supporting any terrorist organizations in 2016. President Donald Trump recently extended the deadline for a review period on easing trade sanctions against Sudan.
Researchers have found a way to elicit powerful HIV-blocking antibodies in cows in weeks instead of years, which may lead to an effective AIDS vaccine. The study, published July 20th in Nature, showed that the HIV-blocking antibodies can be obtained from cows in a matter of weeks compared to the years it takes for the same process in humans. In some people with chronic HIV infection, their bodies produce broadly neutralizing antibodies, or BNABs. One type of BNAB uses long loops that can reach concealed areas on the virus's surface to block infection.
Elon Musk is still a long way from completing a network of underground tunnels in California, but he's already planning an even more ambitious project on the other side of the country. Musk tweeted Thursday he has verbal government approval to build an underground hyperloop on the East Coast. It would connect New York City, Philadelphia, Baltimore, and Washington, D.C. He said the futuristic underground rail system would take passengers from city center to city center, with up to a dozen or more entry and exit elevators in in each city. Musk's Hyperloop time from New York to DC, just 29 minutes. Earlier this year, Musk announced the Boring Company had started digging tunnels under Los Angeles to help deal with the city's out-of-control traffic. Musk says there's still a lot of work to do before he can get formal approval for this new project, but he's optimistic that will occur rapidly.